So we've had 2 cases of Dutch elm disease in the city. We decided to help the city, so we had a big sign made up about how it's illegal to store elm wood. So that's out on the street. We just got that out there this week. So we were busy getting that organized too.
Nice. Yeah, it turned out very well. Okay, so it's after 7, so I'm going to start it for the people that are here. Welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us on the 3rd of the 9 virtual sessions commemorating National Forest Week. Our Forests Continuously Giving is the theme for this year. The afforestation areas are situated in the West Swale Urath Island Glacial Spillway, a sacred site in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Those who entered into Treaty 6 are the Nehiyawak, Cree, Nakawe, Saulteaux, and the Yankton and Yankatoni Nakota people. May our relationships with the land, standing peoples, forests, and waters teach us to honor and respect the past and invite us to move forward in harmony. May we all come together as friends to find inspiration and guidance from histories, languages, and cultures which broaden our understanding and community collaboration for the present and the future. Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, brings home the importance in forming partnerships to achieve the SDGs. It is wonderful to have a partner with SOS Trees. It is impossible to do climate action on our own. So here we have today SOS Trees and Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Linda Moskalyk is the speaker tonight. She's president of SOS Trees and a climate reality leader. Thank you, Linda, for being with us, and I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, and thank you, Julia, for putting this all together this week. That's fantastic. I would also like to acknowledge we are meeting on Treaty 6 territory and home of the Métis. And I also want to acknowledge the history our Indigenous people have with trees for food, medicine, tools, shelter throughout history. And it was important back then, and it is important now, but for other reasons as well, like climate change. And that's a big one for all of us. And so that's why I'm doing this presentation tonight. It's really important to talk about climate change, and through SOS Trees, we are very concerned about our trees and especially our urban forest. So our urban trees, they are linked to a changing climate, as we all are. And the trees, they provide carbon sequestration. Saskatoon's public trees sequester 708,000 tons of carbon annually. That's just the public trees. And then there's all the private trees too, which we don't have an inventory for. So it's really important that we look after our urban forest. We're going to need it. So before we start talking about trees, I'm just going to run over some not so fun facts about our province and climate change. So Saskatchewan's greenhouse gas emissions are among the highest in the world per capita. It is Canada's 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitting province in total volume, and its per capita emissions of 67.7 tons are 246% above Canada's national average of 19 tons per capita. So we're not doing very well in that field. Saskatchewan's emissions make up more than 10% of Canada's total. So that's a large percentage for a province with a small population. The provincial government spent nearly $1.5 billion on a carbon capture project, which only addresses 1% of the emissions. So some other facts are Saskatchewan is one of the sunniest and windiest provinces in Canada, and it has the highest solar and wind power generation potential. So we have all kinds of potential. So I'm really hoping that eventually our government steps up and we can harness some of this potential and help, with our emissions. This summer, many places in Saskatchewan broke temperature records, and winter was also warmer than usual. This summer, 34 communities recorded temperature records on one day, and some were reaching 40 Celsius. So that's a lot of communities to hit record highs just in one day. And Saskatchewan Research Council says that 2021 has been below average precipitation. So June's monthly summary shows rainfall totals for the month of only 30% of normal. So, and June is usually the rainiest month. The amount accumulated for the year is only 47% so far. Saskatoon's cumulative precipitation is just below the record for low cumulative precipitation set in 2001. So 2001 was the lowest for precipitation, but we are just below that right now. So, it's no wonder that our trees are suffering, and we have to start thinking about what we can do about that. So this was interesting. This is from the Prairie Climate Center in Winnipeg. The number of days with daily maximum temperatures 30 degrees or greater. This is just a little thing that they have done up from their data. In 2021 is already a record for 4 months to go in the year. So if you look at the number of days that are above 30 degrees, between 1976 and 2005, on average, it was about 13.9 days per year were above 30 degrees. And then if you look at 2021 to 2050, according to their data and how things have been going over the years, they predict that the average will be 27 to 28 days a year will be above 30. So that's a big difference. And Canada is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. So I guess that's how you can see that happening. So now let's talk about trees. So the tree canopy will be vital for cooling our city. It's going to be so important that we have a good tree canopy. So of course, trees reduce the heating energy and help keep our homes a little bit warmer just by providing shelter in the winter, and of course the shade in the summer. So it's important to protect the trees in our yards, around our homes. It's going to be essential. We're going to have to all have air conditioners in the future if we don't do this, and even if we do have trees, but maybe we could run them less often if we have a good amount of shade around our homes. So our urban forest will need our help. In the coming years, we will need to reevaluate what we plant, where we plant, and the amount we plant. So we need to really expand our planting programs, and we need to do it pretty fast because we need to expand that canopy over our city. So we want people to understand the value of trees to provide so that we can mitigate climate together. So get to know your urban forest and some of the unique species growing in Saskatoon. And I'm sure a lot of you probably have already. And that is something that through SOS Trees we try to do. We try to teach people about the different species, what we have, what's interesting. And we actually have a tree tour. So if people are interested in the tree tour, we have booklets, and it's also online. But I think being familiar can help us understand which trees are doing well and which ones aren't. So, and what are the circumstances for the trees that seem to be suffering? So just things to look for. So what are going to be the issues for trees in a changing climate? Well, of course, number one is drought. And I think we've all seen that this summer with the hot, dry weather and how the kind of condition that some of the trees are around the city. We're also going to have more severe storms, so more wind and flooding. So we've got to think about trees that are going to be able to withstand wind with less breakage, flooding, which can kill trees if we end up with trees sitting in water too long. Then we're going to have our warmer winters and changes in soil moisture. So you get that freeze and thaw thing happening, which I think we saw some of that this winter. And that's pretty similar to what happens in Calgary and has happened in Calgary for a long time with their Chinooks. And they have a hard time growing a lot of different species because of that. Then, of course, we've got different insects, invasive insects and disease to start thinking about. And this is something that's been coming for a while now. And it's due to the warmer temperatures. I guess a good example would be the mountain pine beetle, which we see in British Columbia, and it's devastating the forests out there. But there's always been the mountain pine beetle, and it was more in the southern states. But as California heated up and British Columbia heated up, the population has just exploded with those beetles, and they are devastating the pines in the forests. And we could see them in our northern forests in Saskatchewan. I know they're doing surveys in Cypress Hills right now, so they're quite worried about the trees down there. So that's one example. Another one would be the emerald ash borer, which came from Asia, and it just killed so many green ash trees on the East Coast, and then all through Toronto and some of those areas. But they always said that beetle will not survive, or that borer will not survive in really cold conditions. So we hadn't worried about it, and it's been around for a while now. I don't know if it's about 10 years or more. In the East, and we didn't get it, but I think it was about 3 years ago now, Winnipeg got it, and they thought, well, okay, they found a few. They didn't think it would survive, but it did, and now they have an issue with this beetle starting to kill their ash trees. So from what I read, they're doing some spraying, and they're doing some systemic work to try to save some of the trees, but they predict between 10 and 20 years they'll lose all their ash trees. So it's pretty hard to stop that particular insect. So now that we know that it will survive our weather, and it is because our climate is changing, our winters are milder, it's able to make it through. So that would be devastating here in Saskatoon. That the green ash is a tree that they started planting when they were worried about Dutch elm disease. So they thought it would be a good replacement for the American elm. So we've got a fairly large percentage of our urban trees are green ash. So insects and diseases, and also just to say that any trees that are stressed, due to drought especially, they are more susceptible to these invasive insects as well. So that is something. And so Dutch elm disease, which we have had a couple cases of now, those elm trees will also be more susceptible, the ones that have had problems with drought. So the other things that, the other issues, plant physiological processes such as photosynthesis, seed production, etc., have optimal temperature ranges, so above which they begin to decline. So their optimal growing conditions are going to change, and it's going to change whether or not they're going to be able to survive. And species adaptation, the climate is changing faster than they can naturally adjust, and they may become maladaptive in their environment. So I read a couple scientific papers on this, and they were tracking how trees often can adapt to different situations, but because the climate is changing so fast in Canada, they do not see that happening, and they don't think that our trees will be able to adapt like they should. So those are just some of the issues that our trees are going to face. Not good news. So what I've been seeing around the city, and I took some pictures here. There's some American elm near City Hospital right there. But I see this all over the city. I'll see some beautiful elm that look great. And then I see these elm with all this dead in it. And I talked to some of the city arborists, and they said, yeah, it's this year was particularly bad, but they said it's cumulative. It's been over the last 3, 4, 5 years that they're seeing some of these big old trees starting to decline very quickly. Then there's also the small trees. It's harder and harder for them to establish. They need a lot of water, but even still, you see some of them really struggling. So we live on the prairies. There are a few tree species that are native to the area around Saskatoon. However, many species have been introduced into the mix of our urban forest, and some of these species may be able to withstand drought and acclimatize as well or better. Who knows? So what are we going to plant? What's going to be resilient? Those are the things we're going to have to start thinking about. So in the coming years, there's going to be some experimentation in order to understand what species can endure the drought, high temperatures, more frequent storms, and fluctuating winter temperatures. So it's not going to be easy to figure it out. I always thought that it would be our native trees that, oh gosh, we got to go back to planting more of our native species because they're going to be the toughest. But I'm kind of changing my mind about that in some cases, because after reading how trees will not be able to adapt well, maybe our native species aren't going to be the answer. Maybe we got to look at other species that we think might be tougher, might be able to withstand some of these conditions. So it's going to be a little bit of experimenting to figure it out. It's not going to be, straightforward. So the city of Saskatoon has in their street and park inventory over 100,000 trees, and some are worth up to $45,000 each. Some of the big trees, they're very valuable. Our urban forest in general is very valuable. So, and this doesn't even include the private trees. So I guess we have to figure out which ones will be survivors and what will need replacing. And, in some neighborhoods, especially the old neighborhoods, we saw a lot of monoculture, so a lot of elm trees, which are absolutely beautiful when they line a street. And then we had a lot of ash trees that were planted. And so we're seeing some of these monocultures, but thinking, even though it's beautiful, it probably isn't a good idea. We probably need to diversify. And so that's something that we have to consider going forward. So some of the trees that I've been thinking about, I've been talking to other arborists, just doing some research, and it's still a guess, right? But here's one that I think might be a contender to really help us get through this and maybe will be a survivor, is the Manitoba maple. And this tree, we've got a lot of old ones that are starting to decline because they've been around a long time. But maybe we need to consider planting them again some more. And there's newer varieties out, a little better structure and things like that we can try. And the city is planting some. And I think it is important. I think it's going to be one that, they're drought resistant and they're pretty tough. And I saw this picture, the other day. I had to take a picture from my car window. This is just off Idlewild by Sias. And it's a Manitoba maple. I'm on the street, so the street's in front of me. Then there's a sidewalk, and then there's parking lot. There is not a stitch of soil to be seen or open ground anywhere. And all you can see here is the root flare and the trunk. But if you look at that tree, Manitoba maple, it's doing pretty well. It was quite, considering some of the trees were already losing their leaves. It had a little bit of dieback right at the top, which isn't unusual, but he's tough. So I'm kind of betting that might be one we need to consider. The bur oak, another one, tolerant of city conditions. They have a taproot, so once they're established, pretty drought tolerant, pretty wind resistant. It is native to southeast Saskatchewan. It's not native here, but it is one that I think we need to probably use more. Another one, amber maple. Now, this one is one that I kept looking at the trees this summer, and this little tree, it's not a big one, it's not going to be a huge canopy tree, but it some of them get pretty big and pretty full. They're a beautiful tree. talk about drought tolerant. I didn't see one this summer that looked like it had even skipped a beat in that hot weather, even in places that didn't look like they'd been watered. And I've got a couple in my backyard. They're kind of in an area that I don't water in my yard, and they're just as full and lush as ever. So I'm kind of thinking that this is a good little tree that we need to be planting more of. Of course, Scots pine. This pine grows almost all over the world in any kind of soil conditions. It's also another one that we need to consider planting more of. And the linden, this tree, this summer, I did see some scorching around the edges of leaves, but it's a pretty solid tree, has very few insect and disease problems, even though it did have some scorching around the leaves, and last year I noticed that too. They came right back, and so I think it's a pretty reliable tree and one that we need to consider. Now this one, Russian olive, it is supposed to be very cold tolerant, very drought tolerant. We don't plant many of them. You don't see them really as a street tree. Maybe they could be more as park trees, or I've seen them in people's yards, and they are beautiful when they're planted with with evergreen trees, very drought tolerant. And I think we should be planting a few more of these. In fact, the other day I saw them on 22nd Street down near the end, going west almost out of town. There's a big shelter belt, and it's got lots of evergreen trees, lots of pines, spruce, and lots of Russian olive. And I was looking at them, and I didn't see any dieback, any deadwood in them. And I was thinking, geez, this might be a tree that would be good as well. And then we have to consider native shrubs and what might be very drought tolerant and hardy here. So I think observation might be our best science for this. And I think the more we're out looking at the trees and checking them every year and just figuring out, which ones do we think are going to survive. And in some cases, I've noticed there'll be two big American elms side by side. Seems that they are getting the same amount of moisture, the same amount of green grass under them. One of them will look terrible, and it looks so like it's losing its leaves. The leaves are small, there's a lot of dieback, and the other one looks lush and beautiful. And I don't know, I think maybe genetics may play a part in that. So maybe in cases where we see trees that are doing really, really well in dry conditions, maybe those are the trees that we should be collecting seed from and growing some of those and seeing if that helps as well. So what can we all do? Well, there's quite a few things we can do. We can join or even organize planting projects, and always remember to diversify, plant different species. We can educate others to the importance of trees in our cities in the future. So convince them to plant trees in their own yards, maybe do a neighborhood planting, check out what is already growing there, and then try to come up with some other species so you get more diversity. And also, if you see any issues, call the Urban Forestry Department in Saskatoon or Regina. I've got the Saskatoon number up here, or also the U of S Horticulture Hotline. So if you see any concerns at all, some of the concerns we've had are trees declining because of construction and they're not following the tree protection policy. It could be insects that you see on a tree or just dieback and you're concerned about it. Call in and let them know, because sometimes it's hard for them to see every tree in the city and what's going on, and they need your help too. And for the city, we're hoping that through city planning that they think more about conservation, and also especially for the naturalized areas. So when we see new neighborhoods being built out on the outskirts of the city, they often just plow down all the trees and the wetlands and start fresh. And if we can convince our city planners that they need to start conserving those trees, conserving those the wetlands and the natural aspen areas, and build it into the plan. I just think that would go a long way. So also speak up. We always, through our organization, are asking people to speak up for the trees. So you can write your city council, talk to the media, use social media on all tree issues. An example, I guess, of that would be a year ago. Well, it had been an ongoing issue for a couple of years. One of the city councillors in Saskatoon wanted to bring in a nuisance tree policy. He wanted to make it so that if somebody didn't like their city tree in front of their yard, they could have it taken out if they had a reason. But some of the reasons were, it had apples, or they didn't like the bend in the trunk, or it was a bit crooked, or, no tree is perfect, or it had acorns, or, just reasons, I guess, but that I didn't think were very legitimate. Anyway, we managed to get a lot of our members, people who were shocked that they were going to have all these trees disappear because they could be cut down for all these reasons. So people phoned in, they wrote into their councillors. We managed to get it stopped. So we were really happy about that, because we were quite afraid that that was not going to be good for our urban forest. So observations, again, citizen science, and watering when there's a drought, like it was this summer. So both private trees and water the public tree, and if you have one in front of your property, because the city they just don't have time to water every tree in the city. So anything that's large, and it hasn't, and I think after 3 years they stop watering, and they hope that the residents will help them out, and it's really important. So just talking about climate change again, it's just a combination of actions will result in mitigation. So having trees for cooling will go a long way. Choosing transportation without emissions, shopping local, eating a plant-based diet. Sometimes when you start doing little things, you'll find that it becomes a lifestyle. So you start cycling, and then all of a sudden you decide you're going to start getting involved with tree planting, or you're going to, eat a plant-based diet. So all these things can kind of come together to help mitigate climate change in our communities. So one thing I want to talk about is what's happening in another city, city of Melbourne, Australia. A few years ago, I went to the International Urban Forestry Conference in Vancouver, and almost every speaker talked about climate change. It was one of the things that was on everybody's mind in their cities and what they could do for their urban forest. But I was particularly taken by the speaker, Ian Shears from Melbourne, and he just had a wonderful presentation. And he said that their whole urban forestry program revolves around the key driver of heat and climate change. And that's what got them really going on. They just have an incredible planting program, but they've been planting for years now, because it is so hot down there that they know that's the only thing that's really going to keep their city cool. So some of the things that they're doing in Melbourne, I just found these really interesting. They collaborate with universities to collect data. So they try to find out where are the problems, where to concentrate on vegetation cover, who is going to be vulnerable, where do the trees need to be planted. They plan in a very methodical way. So they're increasing their canopy cover, they're increasing diversity, they're engaging the public and the universities, and improving soil moisture. They're converting roadway spaces into pockets of green. This was interesting. This is something that I'd love to see our city do. So they now have less capacity for cars, and they have also redesigned some of their streets are just one-way traffic. and the rest of the street they'd planted into trees and green space. They also have laneway renewal projects. So the councillors said that their urban forestry management plan was one of their top priorities. So if we can convince our councillors that that needs to be a top priority, that would be amazing. So getting people to connect to nature through technology is another thing they're working on. So they have a great inventory system, and the public can view the inventory and species in their city online. One thing they can do that's kind of fun, they can write to a tree about concerns or questions. So if they see a tree that it looks like it's dying back, or they're not sure what's wrong with it, or they want to know what species it is, they can write to it online, and sometimes the tree writes back. And they also have initiated a children's book. The city did this about trees in the urban forest. So that was pretty cool. So this is a historic picture of University Drive. And it's an example of people looking to the future and thinking of the next generations to come. So our children and beyond that, so to conserve our environment. And we can all do something to make a difference. So if everyone just puts in a little effort and a little time, it's amazing what we can do. And mitigating climate change is just going to be something that we all have to get involved with in the future. So just take some action for the sake of our trees and for our future generations. And so that ends my presentation. And so I would like people it'd be great to hear from you, what you think. I know there's somebody here from Regina as well, what's happening down there. Or if you have any other species of trees that you want to add to that list that I had talked about tonight.
Thank you very kindly, Linda. That was a lovely talk, and I'm sure we all learned an awful lot from it, and it was much appreciated. I just have a comment. When you were talking about the mountain pine beetle, we were doing some research onto it, our group, and we found out that when the beetle attacks the pines put out extra pitch, and then in drought-like conditions, the trees are very dried out, and the combination of a high amount of pitch with the dry conditions, and then also the logging companies, they realize that these trees are dying anyway, so they just come in and harvest them as they're dying or just after they've died so that they can make wood pellets out of them. But that means there's no canopy, which means the interior of BC and the interior of California experience a higher heat amount because the canopy's gone because of this harvesting where the beetle had been. And so that just makes tinderbox conditions. So is there anything that can be done? Like, that's a whole big scenario of things happening and not a good combination to be happening all at once.
Yeah, and I wonder though, if they leave the trees, that's another issue, because there'll be so many dead, dry trees. So I don't know what's worse, taking them out. I'm not a forester. I'm not sure if maybe that the best way is to get rid of them or to leave them. I don't know. It's such a dilemma.
It is. It's very scary. It's very sad. And then the sawmill's just being burnt up while they're there. So lumber was harvested and then they can't even use it because their machines or the railway burnt or the railway bridges burnt or a wholesale mill. It's just a big cascading effect happening there.
Yeah.
So that's pretty sad. Yeah.
Robert, you had a question?
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, Linda. Very good. I was just thinking when you're talking about drought and then you showed that picture of the Manitoba maple, and I wonder if there's any engineering solutions in terms of increasing, the amount of water, like most of the water the tree gets would be coming from the sidewalk area where there's some grass. I mean, is there a way to increase permeability of water or,
Well, there is those structural blocks. I'm just trying to remember what they're called. they have them downtown. They're under the sidewalk and they're filled with soil. So they're super expensive though. And so they have them in, some of the places where they've redone a whole street and they put them underground. And so those seem to help. But yeah, I just don't know if it's feasibly possible to put them everywhere. But I think we need to reconsider where we're planting sometimes. Maybe in the future we can't be planting downtown in those little cement cutouts where it's super expensive, first of all, to even plant there, and to buy those grates that they put over them and to maintain those trees. Maybe we need to concentrate more on open spaces and areas where there's lots of soil and where we can actually put in a lot of trees. That's what we keep thinking, but I know people like the trees downtown. They like that look, along 2nd Avenue or 3rd Avenue with all the trees by the businesses. But, I don't know with climate change, whether that is going to be feasible. And the one thing I noticed, and I think it's actually in Regina's urban forestry management plan. I was reading it. I'm like, wow, because I saw this in Europe, where in Europe, so many big old buildings, there is no room to put trees in the shopping areas or, some of those streets. They've put planter boxes out, and then they'll plant trees and shrubs and flowers in them all along the street. And it's really quite pretty. So along the cafes and everything, they've got trees. They're small, but at least it's greenery down there for people that want to be down there. And then what I read in Regina's is their plan is, whether they've done any of this or not yet, is to take plant a small tree, so you got greenery down there, and then in the fall take it out and plant it in a park. So then you've got a new tree started in a park. Next spring, get another small tree, put it in downtown area in the planter. And so you're taking that tree out every fall and replanting it summer, but you've got green space downtown, but you're not going to that expense of trying to keep these trees alive in these cutouts and try to keep them growing. And they need constant irrigation as they grow in those tiny little spots. So I don't know. I think we have to just think about innovative ways to plant and where to plant.
What in new suburbs, seems to me like there's just the street and then the sidewalk, and then it's the private lot, isn't it? There's
not a separate boulevard,
yeah,
like in the old neighborhoods, but that doesn't mean there is still a city boulevard. A lot of people don't realize that partway up their lawn is still city boulevard.
Is the city planting trees in those spots?
They're trying to. The problem there is the city planners don't always leave space for the trees. And they've been talking about this for years. Like they put the utilities through some of those areas instead of, I guess they don't have back alleys, but they could still run the utility along the very back between the fences. But they put them, I don't know, maybe wherever they think it's easiest, I'm not sure. But a lot of times it eliminates planting sites because there's a bunch of utility lines under there. So if you see a street in a new area that it looks like the city hasn't planted anything, it's a good chance they can't, because the planners just didn't plan for trees. We got to get them on board with that. So, any other comments?
Elizabeth here.
Mm-hmm.
In Toronto, we have a lot of Manitoba maple, and here in Toronto, I think homeowners consider it a weed tree because it's literally impossible to keep out of your garden. It proliferates like crazy. It's very, very hardy, but it's not overly controllable.
I know. Although I would say the American elm here is even worse for little seeds little elms coming up all over. But we tolerate that tree because it is so darn beautiful. But the Manitoba maple, I don't hear as many complaints about that here. They do bring up a little bit. I guess I don't know. I also have an Ohio buckeye in my yard, and the little buckeyes they drop everywhere, and they're coming up like crazy. It's in my flower bed, so it doesn't really matter. I just pull them up. But I know I don't know if there is. I know there's new varieties of Manitoba maple. In fact, I think there is one. I think it's called the Barren Manitoba maple. I'm pretty sure. And I think that it is the male variety only, so it wouldn't have the seed. So we'll have to look that one up, but I'm pretty sure the city has been planting some of those, and it's seedless. So, and that's the thing. Even a lot of the trees that have given us issues in the past, there are new varieties all the time coming out. So maybe there's one that we can use for Manitoba maple that is just as hardy.
Well, again, in some places it won't matter how much it proliferates. In some places, maybe not so much. The other thing I noticed in Saskatoon is the barrenness of some of the parks. Like, why did they plant so few trees in some of the parks?
I know. We ask that all the time. I know. A lot of times when we're out biking around or driving around, we will see these parks like that. And they'll plant like single trees, right? Single one here, sort of like that. Yeah. And I mean, some parks, they leave a lot of open spaces because they are used for people out playing Frisbee in the evening or, things like that. But there are a lot of areas where I know they don't use it for those kind of things, and that we do need to plant more trees. And I would like to see them do more of the cultivating up of areas and then planting big groupings of trees, because trees always do better together. They like each other, and they do better. And if we can get lots of trees planted in groupings, it's more natural, and they can mulch that area with lots of wood chips, and that keeps the weeds down. And I would like to see more of that start happening too. But you're right. There are.
They seem quite barren and not.
There's a lot of room for planting trees. And
seems like they prefer to cut grass rather than.
I know. In some cases, They need to up their planting program, I think, and start getting more in. One thing that is possibly happening, but and it might hinge on the election as well. Some of you have probably heard of the 2 Billion Tree Project through the Liberal government as one initiative for climate action. Last spring, my husband and I listened to a workshop through Nature Canada, put it on. They're trying to push this program for the government just because they think it's a good idea. And so we listened to it and we thought, this is something we need in Saskatoon. And you have to plant a minimum of 5,000 trees a year. So we contacted Meewasin and we contacted the city, and we had a meeting, and they were also very enthused about it and on board. So we put in an application. You have to put in an application. Of course, it's a government program, so it's like a slow moving. We put in the application in the spring, and they're waiting now. And I think they're waiting till after the election, actually, because there was rumor that it might get cut if the Liberals are out. So we're just waiting to see. And and it depends how many other communities, I guess there was quite a bit of interest in it, are interested. So the government pays for, I think it's half. So 5,000 trees would really help, because the last few years, I think in 2020, the city only planted 700 and some trees, 760, but they took out 700 trees. So we're not gaining we're not gaining anything in an urban forest. We need to start building on more planting programs, I think. So we're hoping that this might come through, and it might be a project that they could continue every year, and yeah, we'll see what happens. Any other comments, questions?
What about silver maple? I planted a silver maple here about 20 years ago, and it's huge. I mean, it's grown, really thrived.
Yeah, silver maple, it is kind of known for growing in moister lowlands, so in its native habitat. So I don't know, but it's worth watching to see. I think, Elizabeth, you might want to say something about that one too, because I've heard people down east thinking that's a weed tree too. But this is Saskatchewan. I guess we take what will grow here.
I will say something about a silver maple. We've got one in our front yard, and it looks like it was planted when the neighborhood started, and it's very healthy. It's one of the healthiest trees in our whole neighborhood. So I'm very happy with our silver maple.
And do you water it a lot or no?
No, we are intermittent with our landscaping, but like the last few years, we just have let Mother Nature do it because we've been pretty busy, but it's doing very well.
Wow, see? So even though they say it's more of a lowland tree and likes moisture, maybe it's adaptable, and maybe that is one that will be a tough tree after all.
Yeah, we've got it on the lower lying parts of our lot, but still it's very good. Yeah. I do know when you were talking about the naturalized areas and the city growing, sometimes it's also important to look at infill areas. And ever since they started the New Circle Drive project, they closed down the 11th Street Dog Park, and they changed it to the Southwest Dog Park, and so that they could make the Gordie Howe Bridge and complete the circle of Circle Drive. So I've been watching what's happening to the old 11th Street Dog Park, and it's turned into a row housing or townhouse type complex. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was okay because it was taking up what looked like just the meadowy areas where the dog park used to be, but it's encroaching more and more onto the native trembling aspen stands. So is there a way of finding out if the city of Saskatoon sold out the whole parcel to the developer, and every trembling aspen on that parcel is going to be lost, or if the city retained ownership of any of it so that the townhouses can have a park space at the west end of it?
Yeah, I wonder if you talk to the owner or the developer of that project, they may be able to tell you, or you could probably phone the city planners and find out. But yeah, I like to see them keep some of those naturalized areas. I really wish they're beautiful. I mean, there are pockets of them in the city, and sometimes people have their houses back up onto them, and they're great. So yeah, it just kills me when they just bulldoze them down. But yeah, it would be worth checking into, and it might be something that we need to pressure the city to keep if they do own it, and not sell it and develop it.
Thank you.
It looks like Brian it looks like he's trying to connect his audio, but maybe having trouble. I'm not sure. Can you see that down there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see him. If anybody does want to make a comment and they want to use the chat, if they don't have a microphone on their computer, that's fine too. We're kind of watching the chat group. So.
Susan, if you are listening, do you want to comment anything on what's happening in Regina? No answer.
Yeah, that's curious.
One thing that I've noticed, contractors do it all the time, but I noticed even in a city park, I was up north of 33rd Street, and they put in some new trees in this city park, planting the trees too deep, so that the maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches deep, so it just looks like a post coming out of the ground. And I know contractors do it because it just poor education, and it just makes this tree more steady initially.
But the city is
really surprised to see it in a city park.
Yeah, well, if you do see that, you need to call the city.
Okay, I took some pictures, so yeah, I will.
Yes, take pictures. So was that a contractor working in that park? But there's always an arborist that is supposed to be monitoring the planting.
Yeah, there should be specs, yeah.
No, there is. There's specs. There's somebody that oversees every planting. So what park was that?
I didn't write down, it's probably in my camera, but it's a few blocks north of 30.
North of 33rd.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you can find the name of the park or let me know, I would like to see that too, because we are always, checking up on things like that. That means those trees will not survive. So, very much. All right, thanks everybody. That was great.